Welcome to Wild West Hearts, where honor rides with every hoofbeat dust burns in your lungs and every tail smells of gunpowder.
The fine grit peppered Clara's worn calico dress, clinging stubbornly to the faded fabric. Stand up straight. Pinewood trading post buzzed with the Saturday crowd. Women clutched children to their skirts. Men paused mid-conversation, tobacco juice hanging from the corners of their mouths. A dog barked somewhere, the sound sharp against the sudden hush. "Folks of Cottonwood Gulch," her father announced, voice slurred with last night's whiskey. "Got myself a bargain for one of you lucky men. My daughter Clara, 23 years old. Good with a needle, decent cook." He yanked her chin up. "Pretty enough, just hollow inside. Can't bear children." Clara's eyes fixed on a spot in the distance, the rolling hills beyond town, where freedom lived. She remembered the sharp words of her husband's mother as they'd thrown her belongings onto the street. Useless as a dry well. My son needs sons, not empty promises. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of herbs and prayers and midwives' remedies, 3 years of failure. "Half price of a good mule," her father barked. "Who'll take her?" Silence hung in the air like a thundercloud. Someone spat in the dirt. A woman whispered something that made her companion giggle. The crowd shifted then, parting like water around a stone. Heavy footsteps approached, deliberate and unhurried. Jonah Blackwood stood before them, his shadow stretching long across the packed earth. Trail dust coated his worn leather coat. Pine sap stained his hands and sawdust clung to his beard. The local timberman rarely came to town, and when he did, he spoke even less than he appeared. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. The coins inside clinked as he placed it on the barrel beside Clara's father. "You sure you want damaged goods?" Her father snickered. "No returns accepted." Jonah's eyes, the color of winter sky, finally lifted to meet Clara's. Something passed between them. Not pity, not desire, but recognition. "She won't be judged by me," he said, voice like gravel under wagon wheels. Then he turned and walked away, not looking back to see if she followed. Clara stood frozen, her small bundle of possessions clutched to her chest. Her father's fingers dug into her arm. "Go on then," he hissed. "You're his problem now." The boardwalk creaked beneath her feet as she followed Jonah's broad back through town. Whispers trailed behind her like rattlesnake tails. Outside the blacksmith's, a wagon waited. One wheel looked newer than the others, the wood still pale against the weathered gray. A mule stamped impatiently, swishing flies with its tail. Jonah climbed up without offering help. Clara hoisted herself onto the hard wooden seat, her bundle balanced on her lap. "Long ride," he said, passing her a canteen. The water tasted of iron and distance. They traveled in silence, the great expanse of prairie stretching away on either side. Fence posts leaned drunkenly against the horizon. Hawks circled overhead. Clara stole glances at her companion. The lines around his eyes suggested mid-30s, though the wilderness had a way of aging a man beyond his years. No wedding band, just calluses and a half-healed cut across his knuckles. "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. "Why buy me?" For a long time he didn't answer. The wagon wheel hit a rut, jolting them both. "4 kids," he finally said. "No mother. No time to court proper." Clara's breath caught. "So I'm a nursemaid?" "No." His eyes remained fixed on the trail ahead. "Just figured you might be kind." "That's enough." The wagon rumbled on. Clouds gathered overhead, pregnant with unshed rain. By nightfall they reached a clearing nestled against a stand of ponderosa pines. A cabin sat back from the trail, smoke curling from the stone chimney. The porch sagged slightly in the middle. Chicken wire patched one window. 4 small faces peered out from behind a curtain. 3 boys and a little girl, all with the same wary expression. "This here's Miss Clara," Jonah told them as they climbed down. "She'll be staying." The youngest, barely 3, wrapped his arms around Jonah's leg. The man scooped him up with one arm, his movements gentle despite his size. "Room's upstairs," he told Clara. "Water's in the bucket." She climbed the narrow stairs, each one groaning beneath her weight. The bedroom was small but clean. A patchwork quilt covered the narrow bed. The single window looked out over endless grassland, silver-tipped in the moonlight. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself one silent moment of tears. She had not chosen this path, but for the first time in months, no one asked why she was broken. Jonah's cabin smelled of wood smoke, dried herbs, and wool. The floorboards had been worn smooth by years of footsteps. A cast-iron stove dominated one wall, and beside it, a table crafted from rough-hewn planks. No glass in the windows, just oiled paper to keep out the worst of the wind. The children moved like half-wild creatures, quick to hide, slow to speak. The oldest boy, Caleb, watched Clara with narrowed eyes as she attempted to make breakfast the first morning. "Ma made better biscuits," he said flatly when she placed the misshapen lumps on the table. "Caleb!" Jonah's voice carried a warning from the doorway. "It's all right," Clara said. "I'm sure she did. Perhaps you could tell me how she made them?" The boy's scowl deepened, but later she found him leaving a scrap of paper by the flour bin, ingredients scratched in childish handwriting. Emma, the only girl, kept her distance, hiding behind her father's legs whenever Clara came near. 6-year-old Daniel spoke rarely but watched everything. And little Thomas, with his shock of copper hair, followed Clara everywhere, small fingers clutching at her skirts. That first week, Clara dropped a pot of stew, sending beans and broth cascading across the floor. She froze, waiting for the sharp words, the raised hand. Her husband had not tolerated clumsiness. Instead, Jonah simply grabbed a rag, knelt beside her, and began sopping up the mess. "Just beans," he said quietly. "We've got more." That night, Clara sat on the porch steps, watching stars pierce the velvet darkness. Her hands still trembled slightly. Back home, no, not home anymore. Dropping a pot would have meant no dinner and a night locked in the root cellar. A soft crying pulled her from her thoughts. Emma's sobs drifted through the thin walls. Clara found the girl tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, her small body burning with fever. "Papa!" Emma called weakly. Clara dipped a cloth in cool water and placed it on the child's forehead. "Your papa's chopping wood, little one." "I'm here. Want my mama," Emma whimpered. "I know you do." Clara stroked the damp hair from the girl's face. "I'm not your mama, but I can help you feel better." Through the night, Clara bathed Emma's burning skin with cool cloths. She brewed willow bark tea and coaxed the bitter liquid between the child's cracked lips. She sang soft lullabies her own mother had once sung, her voice growing stronger with each verse. When dawn broke, Jonah found them both asleep, Clara's hand still holding the cloth to Emma's forehead. The girl's fever had broken. Later, as Clara stumbled downstairs, bleary-eyed from the sleepless night, she found a steaming cup of coffee waiting on the table. Beside it lay a small wooden carving, a bird, its wings spread in flight. No note, no explanation. Just a gift, crudely carved but heartfelt. She ran her fingers over the smooth wood and smiled for the first time in weeks. Spring came slowly to Broken Ridge, the hills greening in patches like a faded quilt being mended. Clara no longer cried at night. Her hands grew steady with work, mending clothes, baking bread that didn't burn, planting a small garden behind the cabin. The children began to call her Miss Clara, then just Clara, and finally from little Thomas, Claire Bear, which made her laugh despite herself. She taught Caleb his letters using charcoal on scraps of wood. She showed Emma how to braid her hair and sewed the girl a rag doll from scraps of an old flour sack. Daniel learned to tie his shoes under her patient guidance. And Thomas, he simply blossomed under her attention, his vocabulary expanding daily. But beneath her growing contentment lay a constant fear that Jonah would tire of her, that someone more whole would catch his eye, that she would be cast aside again. One afternoon, Jonah asked if she would accompany him to Cottonwood Gulch for supplies. The wagon creaked beneath them as they made the journey in companionable silence. At the general store, Clara stepped inside while Jonah secured the mule. "Well, look who the wind blew back," came a familiar voice. Clara turned slowly. Her former mother-in-law stood near the fabric bolts, fan fluttering like an agitated bird. Beside her stood a young woman with a smug smile and a noticeably rounded belly. "Martha," Clara acknowledged quietly. "That's her," Martha told the pregnant woman. "The one I told you about. Pretty face, empty womb." "Unlike me," the young woman preened, stroking her belly. "Richard's son grows strong inside me. A true heir." Clara's hands trembled, but she lifted her chin. "I wish you well." "Do you?" Martha's smile was sharp as a skinning knife. "Such nobility from a woman sold like cattle. Tell me, does the timberman treat you better than my son did? Or are you just a servant with extra duties?" Clara's cheeks burned. She turned to leave, dignity the only possession she could claim. A shadow fell across the doorway. Jonah stood there, flour sack slung over one shoulder, eyes cold as winter. "Miss Clara," he said, voice steady. "The children are waiting for those peppermint sticks you promised." He turned to the two women, not a flicker of emotion crossing his weathered face. "My children sleep through the night now." They laugh again. "They've stopped fearing the sound of a woman's voice." His gaze settled on Martha. "So yes, ma'am, she's worth more than your son ever knew." Outside, Clara's breath came in sharp bursts. "You didn't need to defend me." "Wasn't defending you." Jonah loaded the supplies. "Just speaking truth." That night, Clara fashioned a small wreath from wildflowers that grew near the creek. She hung it beside the door, not for beauty, but as a marker. She had survived here for one season. Perhaps she might see another. Weeks passed. Rumors swirled through Cottonwood Gulch. Richard's new wife wasn't pregnant after all, just padding her dresses. Worse, she'd been caught in the livery with the blacksmith's apprentice. Richard had thrown her out, cursing the day he'd let Clara go. Clara was pricing calico at the mercantile when a familiar figure appeared at her elbow. Richard looked thinner, his once proud shoulders slumped. "Clara," he said, voice hushed. "I was wrong. I see that now. You were loyal and kind, and you let your mother spit on me?" Clara's voice remained even. "You threw my things into the street because I couldn't give you what your own seed was too weak to create." Richard blanched. "I was a fool. Come home. Please." Clara studied him. This man she'd once thought hung the moon. "I have 4 children who wait for my stories each night. I have a man who values what I give freely, not what he thinks I owe him." She set down the bolt of fabric. "And I'd rather sweep Jonah's floor than share your bed again." Richard opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. From across the street, Jonah leaned against their wagon, watching. Not intervening, just waiting. His eyes met Clara's. Patient, certain. When Clara stepped out to the well that evening, the moon hung low and full, painting silver shadows across the yard. The children were asleep, their breathing a gentle chorus through the open windows. "Well, ain't you a sight?" She turned sharply. Jeb Tucker, who ran the hunting cabin down the ridge, slouched against the fence post. The reek of whiskey preceded him like a foul herald. "Evening, Mr. Tucker," Clara said coolly. "It's late. You should head home." He pushed away from the fence, movements too fluid for a truly drunk man. "Just being neighborly." "Jonah keeps you locked up tighter than a bank vault. A woman needs conversation, don't she?" "Good night, Mr. Tucker." Clara turned toward the house. His hands shot out, fingers circling her wrist like an iron shackle. "Don't be unfriendly now. Heard you was bought cheap. Thought maybe I could negotiate a better deal than Jonah got." Before Clara could scream, a shadow detached itself from the barn. Jonah moved with the swift certainty of a mountain lion, no hesitation in his stride. One moment Jeb was leering down at her. The next he was sprawled in the dirt, blood streaming from his nose. Jonah stood over him, chest heaving, right hand flexing. He'd never raised his voice in the months she'd known him, never shown anything but measured control. "You all right?" he asked, not looking at Jeb. Clara nodded, rubbing her wrist. "I'm sorry." "Don't." Jonah's voice was rough. "Don't ever apologize for him." He pulled a bandana from his pocket and wrapped it gently around her wrist. "No one touches what's mine." Not without permission. The word hung between them. Mine. He looked at his bruised knuckles and shook his head. "Damn fool." Inside, Clara cleaned his hand with warm water. The cabin was quiet except for the crackling fire and their breathing. "You didn't have to hit him," she said softly. "He would have left." Jonah looked at her, eyes softening in the firelight. "Maybe, but he shouldn't have touched you at all. I didn't think you were one for fighting." "I'm not," he flexed his fingers, "but I like less seeing someone hurt you." Clara blinked rapidly. "I cried today." Jonah remained still, watching her. "Not because I was afraid," she continued, "because no one's ever fought for me before." His hand, still damp from the washing, reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face. The touch was so light she might have imagined it. "Thank you," she whispered. Jonah nodded once. "Reckon I don't want to live in a world where men like that think they can put hands on you." Outside, an owl called into the darkness. Inside, something new and fragile began to take root. Frost rimmed the windows the morning Daniel screamed. Clara dropped the bread dough, flour exploding in a white cloud as she ran toward the sound. The boy lay crumpled beside the woodpile, his leg bent at an unnatural angle, the axe beside him smeared with red. Jonah was already there, his face tight but movements gentle as he lifted his son. "Boil water," he instructed Clara. "Bring the clean rags from the top shelf." She worked swiftly, heart hammering against her ribs. When she returned, Jonah had laid Daniel on the kitchen table, the boy's pants cut away from a deep gash in his thigh. Clara's hands trembled as she pressed clean cloth against the wound. Daniel cried out, his face pale as milk. "I know it hurts, sweetheart," she murmured, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Just hold on." "You're so brave." "Don't cry, Clara," Daniel whispered through clenched teeth. "Pa says men don't cry when they're hurt. Your pa's a good man, but he's wrong about that." She smoothed his hair back. "Sometimes being brave means letting the tears come." Later, with Daniel resting, his leg bandaged and elevated on a pillow, the other children gathered around Clara on the hearth. "Are you staying forever?" Emma asked, her small hand clutching Clara's skirt. Clara hesitated. "I'm staying as long as your father wants me to." "He wants you to," Caleb said with the certainty of a child. "He told us." "Did he now?" Clara asked, her heart skipping. "He said you make the cabin a home again," Emma added, "and that we should be nice to you even when you burn the biscuits." Clara laughed despite herself. "Well, I'm getting better at those." Thomas climbed into her lap, his copper curls tickling her chin. "You're our mama now," he declared. "Pa said so." From that day forward, they called her Mama without hesitation, not in defiance of the woman who had given them life, but in recognition of the woman who had given them care. Clara accepted the title like a precious gift, one she had thought forever beyond her reach. Jonah watched it all from a distance, saying little. But she caught him studying her when he thought she wasn't looking. The way she bandaged scraped knees, the patience with which she untangled Emma's hair, the stories she invented to make them laugh. One evening after the children were asleep, Clara sat on the porch, watching fireflies dance above the tall grass. Jonah settled beside her, the step creaking beneath his weight. "I ain't much for speeches," he began. "You say what needs saying," she replied. He nodded. "When I paid your father, I thought I was buying you freedom, not claiming ownership." Clara turned to face him, heart pounding. "I know you had no choice then," he continued, "but you do now. If you want to leave, make your own way. I won't stop you." She studied his profile in the fading light, the straight nose, the stubborn jaw, the lines that years of sun and wind had carved into his skin. "I used to think love was being chosen first," she said softly, "but I've learned something better. Being chosen after someone knows exactly who you are." His jaw tightened. "And if I'm choosing you now, then I'm not going anywhere." Clara reached for his hand, rough with calluses but gentle in its touch. "I may not have birthed your children, but they've given me a purpose I thought lost to me. And you gave me room to become myself again." Jonah turned to her then, not with possession but with wonder, as if she were the one who had rescued him from the wilderness. He drew her gently against his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "I just wanted you safe," he murmured into her hair. "And now I want more than safety," she replied. "What's your full name, son?" the schoolteacher asked, adjusting his spectacles. Caleb stood straight back beside Clara, his new primer clutched in white-knuckled hands. The one-room schoolhouse smelled of chalk dust and linseed oil. "Caleb Aaron Blackwood," he answered proudly. "And your mother's name?" There was a moment's hesitation. Clara's breath caught. "Clara Blackwood," Caleb said firmly. The teacher's pen scratched across the paper. "Is that your mother's married name?" Caleb nodded, solemn as a judge. "That's what we call her." Clara felt something warm bloom in her chest, spreading outward like sunlight. She had worn many names. Clara Bennett, daughter of a bitter drunkard. Clara Holcomb, rejected wife. Clara Nobody, sold in a town square. But this name had come from a child's truth, not from legal documents or a preacher's blessing. When they returned to the cabin, Jonah was at the table, whittling what appeared to be a small horse. He looked up as they entered, his eyes asking the question. "He did just fine," Clara said, smoothing Caleb's hair. That evening, as she hung laundry on the line, Jonah approached. Something held behind his back. "Got something for you," he said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He handed her a small leather-bound book, its pages creamy and blank. "It ain't much," he said, looking past her shoulder. "But I figured if anyone deserved a fresh start, it's you." Clara opened the book, ran her fingers over the empty page. "I used to dream of beginning again," she said softly. "I never thought I'd get to write the story myself. It's yours to fill however you want." She looked up at him. "Will you read it?" "If you'll let me." That night, after the children were asleep, Clara sat by the fire and wrote her first entry. "Today I was loved for who I am, not for what my body could or couldn't do." She did not show Jonah the words. She didn't need to. The way he looked at her across the supper table, the gentle brush of his fingers when he passed her the coffee, the fact that he'd built a shelf for her growing collection of books, all of it spoke what words could not. Drought settled over Broken Ridge like a curse. For 2 months, no rain touched the parched earth. The creek behind the cabin dwindled to a trickle. Gardens withered, livestock grew thin, and tempers frayed under the relentless sun. Jonah spent longer hours away, searching for timber worth cutting, coming home with less each day. His shoulders stooped with worry, though he never complained. Clara heard him at night, calculating figures by lamplight, scratching out numbers that wouldn't balance. The children ate less but never mentioned hunger. Even little Thomas, now 5, had learned to take smaller portions without being asked. Clara refused to surrender. Before dawn each morning, she hauled water from the deepest well, saving every drop. She replanted the garden 3 times, shading delicate seedlings with scraps of canvas. When others abandoned their plots, she worked harder, coaxing life from soil that cracked like old leather. "You're wasting your time," old Mrs. Whitaker told her at the general store. "Ain't nothing gonna grow in this forsaken summer." "Maybe," Clara replied, purchasing precious seeds with money saved from selling her embroidery. "But I'd rather try and fail than surrender without a fight." Jonah fell ill as July burned into August. He collapsed in the doorway one evening, face gray with exhaustion, skin hot to the touch. "Just tired," he protested as Clara helped him to bed. But the fever took hold, burning through him like wildfire. For 3 nights, Clara barely slept, bathing his brow with cool cloths, spooning broth between his cracked lips. She sang to him, told him stories of green meadows and flowing streams, though her voice grew hoarse with fear. On the 3rd night, as thunder growled in the distance but no rain fell, Jonah thrashed in delirium. "Clara," he mumbled, reaching blindly. "Don't leave." Not like she did. Clara pressed her lips to his burning forehead. "I'm staying right here," she promised, "right where I belong." The fever broke with the false dawn. When Jonah opened his eyes, clarity had returned to their blue depths. Clara sat beside him, hair loose around her shoulders, dark circles beneath her eyes, but a smile breaking across her face like sunrise. "You look terrible," he croaked. She laughed, the sound rusty from disuse. "You should see yourself." Outside, against all odds, Clara's garden had survived. Stunted, struggling, but alive. A week later, Emma came running from behind the cabin. "Mama, come quick. There's a tomato." Clara hurried after her. There, dangling from a withered vine, hung a single tomato, small but perfectly red. Jonah came to stand beside them, leaning heavily on a walking stick. "How?" he asked, wonder in his voice. Clara looked up at him. "You taught me that not everything worth keeping comes easy." He reached down and took her hand, his thumb tracing the calluses on her palm. Then wordlessly, he raised her fingers to his lips. That night, they sliced the tomato 6 ways, each savoring the sweet tart flavor like a holy communion. As darkness fell and the children slept curled together for comfort, Jonah sat beside Clara on the porch steps. "I don't have much left," he said quietly. "The timber's dying. The market's dried up like the creek. All I can offer is this broken-down cabin, 4 half-wild children, and myself." Clara leaned against his shoulder. "Then you're offering everything I need. Before you, I had a name," people whispered with pity. "Now I have children who run to me when they're hurt. I have a garden that grows despite the odds. And I have a man who sees me as whole, not lacking." He kissed her then, not with desperate passion, but with the quiet certainty of something long awaited finally arrived. His hands, rough from years of work, cradled her face as if she were made of spun glass. And though no rain blessed the land that night, something just as essential fell upon 2 hearts that had weathered their own drought. Years painted themselves across Broken Ridge in seasons of scarcity and plenty. Clara's garden, once a stubborn patch of struggling seedlings, now sprawled behind the expanded cabin, feeding not just their family, but neighbors when times grew lean. It grew in defiance of convention. Tomatoes tangled with marigolds, beans climbed alongside morning glories, herbs nestled between rows of corn. Each morning, Jonah would stand on the porch, coffee steam rising like prayers, watching Clara move among her plants. He never interrupted her work, just observed the miracle of something thriving where it should have withered. The children grew tall, their wild edges softened by Clara's patience and Jonah's steady hand. Caleb apprenticed with the blacksmith in town. Emma taught the younger children at the schoolhouse. Daniel helped Jonah with the timber business. Thomas, still copper-haired but no longer small, showed a gift for carving wood into shapes that captured the soul of Broken Ridge. Then the railroad men came with their pressed suits and rolled maps. "Progress is coming," the lead surveyor announced, pointing to lines drawn through the heart of their land. "The transcontinental spur will run right through here. We're authorized to offer fair compensation." Jonah stood on the porch, Clara beside him, her hand resting in the crook of his arm. "Think of what you could provide for your family," the man continued. "A real house in town, modern conveniences, education for your children." Jonah's eyes drifted past the man's shoulder, taking in the cabin he'd built with his own hands, the garden where Clara knelt each morning, the tree where they'd buried their first dog, the swing where grandchildren now played. "No," he said simply. The railroad man blinked. "Mr. Blackwood, perhaps you don't understand the opportunity." "I understand just fine." Jonah's voice remained level. "This land isn't for sale." After the men left, kicking up dust with their polished boots, Jonah and Clara hammered a sign at the edge of their property. "Not for sale." Years flowed by. Their children brought home spouses, then babies. The cabin grew, room by room, to accommodate the expanding family. And through it all, Clara's garden continued to bloom, even in the harshest seasons. One autumn afternoon, their youngest grandchild, a girl with Clara's eyes and Jonah's stubborn chin, asked, "Grandpa, why do you call it Grandma's garden instead of just the garden?" Jonah led the child to the garden gate, where an arch of twisted branches framed the entrance. He pointed to words carved into the wood. "She grew roots where others saw only barren ground." "What does it mean?" the girl asked. Jonah smiled. "It means your grandma taught me that the most precious things often grow in the hardest places." When Clara passed, they buried her beneath the apple tree she'd nursed through 3 droughts. On the wooden marker, Jonah carved by hand, "Here lies the woman who made everything bloom." He joined her the following spring, when the wildflowers she'd loved carpeted the hills in purple and gold. The garden never died. And long after the railroad found another route, long after the town forgot why the tracks curved around Broken Ridge, travelers would pass the old fence and read the weathered sign, "Not for sale," because sometimes a place remembers those who refuse to surrender. Sometimes love takes root in the most unlikely soil and blooms for generations to come. Sometimes love takes root in the most unlikely soil and blooms for generations to come.